Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to tell you about all of the books that I read in January. I read 10 things in January, and I'll have content warnings down below if you would like to see those for the books that I mentioned in this video. And without further ado, let's get right down to the books. So, I am a mood reader and I'm currently in the mood to read fantasy books, so there shall be quite a few fantasy books in this wrap up. First of all, we're starting with my only 5-star read of the month and my brand new favourite, and that is Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson. I actually started this one last year and finished it this year. So in this one, we're following our main character who lives in this nunnery, and they are learning how to deal with the spirits of the dead. And there's a test coming up where you can get escalated to this apprenticeship, and she definitely has the skills to do that. But she does not want to do that. She wants to fail the test and just live a quiet life in the countryside. However, when disaster strikes and her home is attacked, maybe she needs to pair up with somebody uncanny to save the people that she cares about. I really enjoyed this, and I think with this third book from Margaret Rogerson that I've read, it cements her as one of my favourite fantasy writers. I just think she does such a good job of creating a world seamlessly that's maybe not the most unique thing ever, but it's just so fun and so creative and makes so much sense within the world. The world building is seamless and effortless. But what I especially like about her writing is her way to pair up two characters who would not like to work together and then have to work together. I'm not as keen as everyone else on the enemies to lovers trope, but I am a big fan of enemies to co-workers, or just enemies to needing to collaborate, and this does that so well. The two characters that don't want to work together have the best banter ever, and it's especially unique because of the way that they are connected to each other, I'll say. And I just thought it was funny, it was hilarious, it made me laugh, but also seeing them casually come to grow and like each other and form a kind of friendship bond was absolutely beautiful. It was just done so well. The characterization in this is fantastic. I just loved our main character. She's so selfless, but to the point where sometimes she doesn't learn how to take care of herself so that she can take care of others. And she's also quite anxious and has anxiety. And I liked seeing her work through that, acknowledge it, and try her best to fix it. I think sometimes we can push ourselves to the limit and not take the time to step back and rest and to take care of yourself. And it was nice to see a character in a fantasy book where they're often being forced to step up, realize that maybe sometimes you need to rest and restore. It's something that I need to learn, and it was nice to see that in this character. There are secondary characters as well, and I thought they were fairly well developed. I'm not going to say they were the shining star of this book, but I still felt like they were all individual. I still feel like they all had their own storylines that they were following, and it was just nice to see them interact with the main character, also without a pressure of romance. There was no romance in this book, and I quite enjoyed that. I just liked seeing her interact with everyone and know that the plot was going to be solid. I think the plot was very solid in this one. I'm not going to say it's the most unpredictable thing ever, but I also didn't exactly know where the direction was going sometimes. I mean, sometimes I did figure it out, but also sometimes I was like, oh, that's a little bit surprising and that's nice. So I would say that this one is just really good fun. I think Margaret Rogerson's books are always so much fun, and you cannot fault her for that. I gave this 5 stars. I'll read anything that this woman writes. The next book I have to talk about is The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. This is the sequel to the 5th season, which was one of my favourite books that I read last year. So I've talked about the 5th season a lot, but if I had to summarise it quickly, it's set in this world where orogenes exist, and orogenes have the power to create earthshakes and to change the earth that they are on. However, they are the oppressed people in this society. They are downtrodden. They are ruled over by this system, and they're hated by a lot of people. And we're following some characters who live in this world and start to realise that things that they've been told about their world may not necessarily be true, and this has consequences. I was very excited for this second book in the series because I absolutely loved the first one so much, and while I did really enjoy it, at the same time, I did have a few issues with this one, and I did think, even though it was such a good book, it still fell into second book syndrome. So first of all, we must just applaud N.K. Jemisin. She is the queen of world building. Like, her world building is so extensive. I don't even know how to describe it. It's next level. I've never read world building as good as N.K. Jemisin's. You read the first book and you learn so much about the world and you're just taking it all in and you're like, well, that's the world, you know, that it's done. There's nothing more she can do to build and expand on the world. And then this book comes into existence and she just builds even more on what she was building in the first place. It's like she made the foundation with book one, and in this she builds the castle. I just think her world building is immaculate, and if you're going into the book for that alone, you will be so happy. As well as that, she does such a good job with playing with perspective in her books. You see that in the first book and it's done so well. There's second person point of view and it reads so naturally and easily, but in this one she still manages to do that, and I was impressed because I thought there was no way she could do something creative with perspective again, and yet she does, and I really liked it. I really liked getting to see more of characters that we'd met in the first book. My favourite character in the first book was Hoa, and it was just so nice to learn more about him in this book. He was quite a mystery in the first one, and I would say he's still fairly mysterious, but you get to learn more about characters that you've met, about the types of characters that you met, and it's just expanded and some things are explained and you get answers, and it's fantastic. Also, coming to the light, we've got some new characters here, and unfortunately for me, those new characters did not quite intrigue me as much right up until the end. At the very end, I started to feel more for these characters and get more invested in what was happening with them, but I will say that the new characters, the new set of characters that were introduced, it took me quite a while to warm up to them. I'm also someone who personally struggles with books where it feels like a character becomes static. So sometimes characters in books need to learn something or take in some information, and I don't like it when one character just tells them the information they need to know, and it feels quite exposition-y. It feels like a dry way of doing it. I like when there's more action and autonomy placed on the character discovering information, and this one it does fall a little bit into information gets recited to someone gradually, and there it kind of lost me a bit. It started to get a bit slower. I was starting to get a bit frustrated with the book because I wanted it to have more things happening. I wanted there to be more action, more pickup of the pace, because even though in the first one I do feel like that happens quite a bit, there was just so much more moving the story along too, and I think this one lacked that a little bit, and therefore it got a bit slower. In the middle there it got a bit boring, and I knew that we needed this information to get to the end of this book, but I do think it could have been told to me in a bit of a different way. That said, when I was reading the ending, I couldn't stop reading. I had shivers. The ending was so suspenseful and so good, and such a great build up towards it. So the very end of this book was just, I raced through it, I flew through it, but the middle was quite slow, took me some time. I wasn't always excited to pick up the book, but I knew that inevitably I would pick up the book because this world is amazing and I need to see where the series goes. So that is to say, a bit of second book syndrome, but this was still a solid read. I am definitely going to be reading the third book as soon as I possibly can, and thank you to my fellow middle sister April for buddy reading this one with me. So at the start of the year, I said I wanted to read the oldest books on my TBR, and I started off this month by reading one of them. I read American Gods by Neil Gaiman, and I hated it. I really didn't like this book. So in this one, it's following the gods of America. They're real, and these American gods are sometimes these ancient gods from different cultures and religions, but sometimes they are also gods of new things that exist. And we're following Shadow, who is this man who comes out of prison, and he somehow gets tangled up with the gods and within this whole situation that they've got going on, which is the most boring plot to follow ever, because all Shadow does is not know anything and travel across America and encounter these gods every now and again and travel across America. It was the most dry, boring plot in existence, and this book is over 500 pages long, and all of the plot that comes together in the last 80 pages. I said it with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I'll say it again here. We cannot have books with over 500 pages of build-up. That is not how a plot works. Just so frustrated by that. I would like to say that this book had interesting gods, but it just didn't. I didn't care about any of the gods. Some of them came and then disappeared and you never saw them again. What was the point? Only a few kept reappearing. It's nice that there was diversity in the gods. It was nice to see like Indian gods and Jamaican gods included, but also it feels a bit when you've got the N-word written by a white author in the book. So that, yeah, no thanks, didn't like that. The plot that came together at the end was one of the most frustrating plots. I don't want to explain anything or give anything away, but if you've ever watched Phineas and Ferb and that platypus gets captured and the villain explains the plan to the platypus and then the platypus escapes and then solves the issue because he knew the plan, it's not exactly like that, but it feels like that. So the whole thing kind of felt like, well, this could have been easily avoided, or this could have been easily solved, and it just felt ridiculous. The whole thing felt ridiculous. The thing that I felt when I finished this book was sheer happiness. I'm glad it's done. I'm glad it's off of my TBR. Unfortunately, I've read 2 books by Neil Gaiman and I will not be reading any more. Thank you to Hannah from Ledette M for buddy reading this with me and helping me push through it. One day we will buddy read a book that we both actually enjoy. Okay, then the next thing I read was Geekerella by Ashley Poston. I finally read this and I loved it. I can't in full mind like give it 5 stars, but it's actually gonna probably be a new favourite young adult contemporary for me because I really had a good time reading this book, which surprised me because I've actually read Ashley Poston's fantasy book Heart of Iron and I could not stand it, but Geekerella, I was a geek for it. So Geekerella is a Cinderella retelling that is set around a con that these characters are going to. So the Prince Charming is an actor who's got a role in this remake of a big TV series that has a huge fandom behind it, and then the Cinderella character is someone who's a big fan of this TV series that's getting a remake, and she does not like who has been cast to play the main male character. What I really loved about this book is how the author managed to make me care about a fandom that actually doesn't exist. It's a fandom that seems similar to Star Trek and Star Wars. It's that kind of like sci-fi space opera, big budget TV series, and even though we only catch glimpses of it through the characters' love for the series and through the con, it just felt so much like how it feels to be a fangirl, how it feels to really love something like that, that I fell in love with the fandom as well. It's kind of everything I wanted from Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell but did not actually get, and the characters were so sweet. I liked both of them. I think it does a good job of showing how if you meet people in the wrong moment or in the wrong situation, you can just have a completely different perception of what that person is like than what they truly are like, and I kind of liked seeing that. I liked seeing their relationship while they were apart, and the texts were really sweet and the romance was really cute. I do think the switch from kind of disliking each other to romance kind of went a bit too fast. It was like a big switchy switch, but I didn't really mind because I was having a good time with this book. Like I said with Anne of Green Gables, this book is good vibes only. Nothing too bad happens, nothing too tragic, but it just gives you those happy, warm feelings, and it's really sweet and it's really cute and it's incredibly predictable. This was back when retellings weren't trying to do anything fancy or fun with their retellings. It's just a straight up retelling. You can see all of the markers of the Cinderella story in there and it works and it's lovely, and I immediately went and got myself the second book in the series because I just want to read them all. Then I read Blue is the Warmest Colour by Julie Maroh. This is a French graphic novel that has been translated. It's also a film that's very popular. I've not seen the film, but I read the graphic novel. I thought this one was fine. I really wanted to love it more than I did. It follows a young girl in France. This is kind of set in the past, and she discovers that she's a lesbian and she kind of has her sexuality awakening, and she's struggling with internalized homophobia, the homophobia around her, and she sees a girl with blue hair and she really likes this girl. A lot of the reason why I struggled this one is a personal thing. There's something that happens in books that I typically don't enjoy reading about, and it happens in this book a lot. So I'll leave that as the first word in the content warning for this book if you want to know what that is, but I don't want to say it in case people find that to be spoilers. spoilers, but personally I don't like reading about that, so personally this wasn't the one for me. I really liked the artwork. I liked how it had the cool colours, and then the blue was the only colour that really shone through. I'll have a flip through of the graphic novel so you can see what I mean. So I kind of liked the artwork, but I also really struggled with the main character. I thought she was incredibly selfish and very self-centered. She never took a moment to think about how her words or actions would affect the people around her. Especially so for her friend. Her friend was just so good to her all the time, was always there for her, seemed to be the nicest character in the book, and she just treated him badly or only went to him when she needed things. I wasn't a big fan of that. I do think sometimes the jumps in this were a bit awkward, or the scene cuts felt a bit choppy. So overall I think it was just fine. I'm glad I finally read it because I was so curious about this graphic novel. So I'm glad I read this one, but I don't think it's one I'll be rereading. Switching to one of my non-fiction reads, I read Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Doughty. I read her book Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs last year when I did 30 books in 30 days, and I really wanted to read another one, so I did. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes feels a bit more mature. It's kind of a blend of memoir, non-fiction. So in this one she's talking about death rituals, death, grief, and the practices that we have around them and the practices that we had around them. And I really liked her argument for how death has been removed and erased from society. We don't like to think about it. We don't see dead bodies regularly anymore. We don't have any death rituals that are quite standard. Things are covered up and hidden from view, and I liked her dissecting how we got here, how we got to this point where death is erased from our culture. And she also talks about how in other cultures around the world, because she's talking from the Western point of view, there are still death rituals, there are still death practices, and she talks about some of them, and she talks about the history and what we could do better in the future, while also talking about her experience as someone working in a crematorium with no training as her first job. And I thought it was great. It was fascinating. I learned a lot. She does a good job of blending a sense of humour while still being very sensitive about the topic that she's discussing and talking about in this one. Very impressed with that balance. It's hard to maintain and get right. I do think that if you've read Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs, it does have some repetition, so there's some things that she repeats. This one was written first though, so probably should have read this one first. But yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I do want to read her third book. I thought it was very good. So this was actually my first read of the year, and I didn't like it. It was Wait by Jeanette Winterson, and I really hope that this being my first read of the year is not indicative of the rest of my year. But oh well. So this one is a retelling of Heracles and Atlas's story. You know, Atlas, the guy who carries the world on his shoulders. So it's just their story, but didn't do it for me. At one point in the book, the author says, I don't really know how to end this story. And I was like, sis, I could tell. So it's very short. It's a quick read. I read it all in one day, but it still just didn't hit it for me. It felt so male gazy, which is interesting because I think nearly all the characters were men anyway, but I could still feel the male gaziness of it. It just felt really random and sexual when it didn't need to be sexual at times. And I know she was trying to do some connections between Atlas and carrying the weight of the world and modern day society, and well, I should say contemporary day society and all of that jazz. It just wasn't working for me. Nothing was adding up, nothing was connecting. I didn't feel anything for this book, unfortunately. I read Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, and this was a book I read for a reading vlog where I celebrated my best friend's birthday and read a book that was outside of my comfort zone. And it was solid, but it just wasn't the one for me. This one is all about the surprising new science that will transform your sex life, and is talking about female pleasure, desire, and sexuality, which is something that there has not been enough research done on, so it's quite monumental that this book exists and is out there for people, for women in particular, to understand their sexuality and desire and how their body works. I will say that this is for cisgender women. The author does disclose that in her introduction, and that there still needs to be more research done on trans desire, pleasure, and sexuality. So it was good. I learned a lot of things. It feels a bit more self-help non-fiction and personal development non-fiction than I was expecting. There are some exercises here that you should be doing. I didn't do any of them because it's just not my area of interest. but I've learned some things, and even when I was reading romance, I was mentally just subconsciously applying what I'd learned to the steamy scenes I was reading and seeing how things fit together, which was so interesting, and I'm kind of glad I have this knowledge. But it still wasn't my favourite thing. She did do one thing that I found really, really annoying, and that was she would give an example and then she'd be like, and you'll figure out the answer to this example and why this happened in chapter 8. And I was just always there like, why are you telling me the example now? Why don't you tell me the example in chapter 8 so we can focus on what we're reading about now, and then later on connect the dots? But she just kept doing that. She kept saying, we'll know the answer to this in chapter 7. We'll know the answer to this in chapter 15. When I got to that chapter, I wouldn't remember the previous example or why I was anticipating it. So I do think that in terms of the writing, that could have been sorted out and smoothed over a bit. But yeah, a good book. Not one for me. I think it's going to wow a lot of other people. I do think the other thing that I was unsure about was how she didn't talk about asexuality at all in this book, and I thought that it's something that you probably should talk about when it comes to desire and pleasure. I also read another graphic novel in a day. It was quick, it was easy, and it was lovely, and that is Wild Up Wrong by Rachael Smith. This is a graphic novel memoir about her experience with mental health and going to therapy and depression. And I have read something by her before last year, and I thought this was just a very good continuation. I really like the way that she brings to life her depression and brings to life her mental health emotions through her artwork. I'll show a bit of a flip through so you can see what I mean. I thought that was all done really well. I liked the colours, and the panels are disjointed sometimes, so they're not always linear or exactly telling a story, but at the same time they do connect up and you see her journey through depression to therapy and beyond. So they're connected, but they're not linked every single time. Outside of her panels, she does sometimes give a summary of what happened on the panels, and I don't think that was necessarily necessary. I thought she could have done without that, but they're there, it's fine, it didn't ruin the experience or anything. Overall, a very good graphic novel memoir, and I would recommend it. And then last but not least, I read a poetry collection, and that was Gold from the Stone by Lemn Sissay, and this was a fine poetry collection. It didn't really do it for me, but it did not do it for me. It was just a case of this poetry collection is not for me. I think poetry is very personal, and I can see how lots of other people would really like these poems, but again, they just weren't for me. I think what he does well with his poetry is his sense of rhythm and rhyme. I'm impressed by how much rhyme he got in there. I think getting rhyme in poetry right is quite difficult, and I can easily imagine these poems said out loud to a rhythm. I feel like there could be very good performance poetry, more so than written poetry sometimes. Yeah, I thought they were fine. I don't have anything bad to say about them. They just weren't my personal cup of tea. So all in all, those are the books that I read in January. For me personally, I don't think this was my best reading month in terms of quality. I read a lot of mediocre books and a few I didn't like. I'm glad for the ones that I did like, but hopefully in February there'll be even more ones that I can really love. Please let me know in the comment section down below what was your favourite book that you read in the first month of the year. I hope you had some good ones to start off with. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't you forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior! And her what do you call that nun place? Where all the nuns live.